Hi, I'm Nisha DeGaring, host of Good Things Utah, and I've been a longtime supporter of Todd's Belief Cast. I hope you find inspiration in the courageous stories shared by the amazing people Todd features on his show. The guests serve as shoulders for us to stand on, allowing us to see a little further and cultivate belief in oneself. Remember, you have the dignity and power to change. I encourage you to keep striving and believing in yourself. Enjoy today's podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Todd Sylvester, your host of the Belief Cast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys' support so much. Today, I am honored to sit down with a man whose life is a testament to service, wisdom, and the transformational power of stories. Steve Mann is a global entrepreneur, philanthropist, mentor, and a passionate advocate for legacy storytelling. He has lived and worked around the world, from Africa to Southeast Asia, founding businesses and charitable foundations that lift and empower others. But what makes Steve truly remarkable is his heart. He believes that our stories are one of the greatest gifts we can pass on to the next generation. We're going to talk a lot about that today. His work centers around helping families strengthen their connection, preserving their history, and share the wisdom, joy, and love that shapes who we are. Steve is an author of a new book called Stories That Shape Us. It is a powerful guide to navigating through conversations, teaching values, and keeping the art of storytelling alive. His life experiences, his global perspective, and his deep compassion for people make him the perfect guest today. Steve Mann is here to remind us that our stories matter and that when we share them, we create a legacy of healing and belonging. And also, I've had Steve's son, Jeff, on my podcast as well, who's a remarkable human being, as you well know. And so I feel really blessed to have you on here. I was going to tell you, after I had your son on the show, without hesitation, he's like, you have to have my dad on the show. You have to. I'm like, okay, we'll figure it out. And he's been relentless. I'm not kidding you. Like, he is like, you got to get him on. And he's always following up, and it's been great. And he obviously loves you so much, and you've been such a great influence on him. And he shared a lot of that in our episode with him. So again, thanks for being here, Steve.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Well, why don't we start off letting our listeners know, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and give us some information around your childhood.
Okay, I grew up on a small potato farm on the Idaho-Oregon border.
Right.
So it's a kind of classic farm boy story. And years later, I was serving as a mission president in South Africa, and my missionaries would say, well, what did you learn growing up on that farm? I said, well, I'd ask them, what do you think I learned? He said, well, I learned hard work and things like that. I said, yeah, that's true, but mostly I learned I wanted off that farm. I wanted to go do other things. And I've been really, really fortunate in my life to have been able to travel all around the world, work all in places around the world. And when you live in other places and work with other cultures, it changes your view of life.
Right.
And how you see others and how you see yourself.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I grew up there on that farm, which is a great place to grow up.
Sure.
Went to school at BYU and was lucky enough to get in a brand new master's program in organizational behavior. And their whole approach was to try to teach us to be change agents, to go out and break things and make things different.
Okay.
And so I then moved to California with a semiconductor company and started my own company with a couple of friends. And our original idea was to be a small consulting firm so we wouldn't have to travel. But we created a product that the company we created it for didn't like. We thought it was great, so we decided to market it, and it became the best-selling supervisory training program in the world.
Really? Wow,
and,
that's impressive.
So I then moved from consulting to product development to building a domestic organization, then an international organization. Okay. And that's where I started making connections that shaped a lot of the rest of my life. I would see people with problems, or I'd meet somebody and they were trying to deal with issues. And I started using my experience and the things that I had to develop to start helping things like that. And so we sold that company, and I moved back to Idaho, that's where the Idaho came from,
Yes.
where we
Okay.
mostly raised our family. And I started traveling a lot then with foundations, particularly in the Philippines, in Africa. And I came back one time from Africa, and we went to a meeting. I didn't know what it was, and it turned out to be trying to convince people to go on senior missions. So I turned to my wife and said, hey, we can't do that with 6 dependent children, but who cares? Want to move to Zimbabwe and see if we can make a difference with AIDS?
Wow.
She said, let's go.
Serious.
And literally 5 months later, we were living in Zimbabwe with 6 dependent children.
Gosh, that's amazing.
And I was running around the country trying to understand what was going on and where I could make a difference.
My goodness.
And so from there
That's
on, we
amazing.
lived in a number of countries in Africa and different places. And it's been a great life.
That is amazing. And there's so much to unpack there. So thank you. And wow, what a decision. Hey, let's move. And your wife's like, let's go for it. You know, I mean, that in itself is a whole story we could talk about. I want to jump back a little bit. You know, growing up on a farm and it made you realize I don't want to be on a farm. But I would imagine one of the things you learned was the value of hard work, because I've had a few friends that have grew up on a farm. My father-in-law, who has since passed, he was a rancher. So I used to go help him, you know, brand calves and cows and bale hay and all kinds. It was the hardest work I've ever done in my life. So was that one of the experiences you had?
Yeah, it didn't so much feel like hard work at the time because it's just what life was.
Yeah, you didn't know any different. Yeah.
I do recall one time out picking up rock, which was a never-ending experience on a farm, with my dad. And it was a hot summer day, and he stopped for a minute and wiped the sweat off his forehead, and he says, you know, I'm beginning to doubt the church. I said, what? And he says, yep. He says, you know, I haven't done anything bad enough to deserve all these blankety-blank rocks. And so it was hard work. Yeah. But that's a good thing to learn.
Yeah, it is. And especially at such a young age. And I think you're right. You didn't know any different. It's just what you did. Have you noticed that work ethic paid off as you went into other things as you got older?
Yeah, and in fact, it kind of became something I had to manage a little bit because I could get so carried away with my work that I wasn't paying the attention that I should have been to my wife and my family.
Okay.
And so hard work is just part of what I do, and then I had to learn how to manage that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It's still other kinds of work, but not to be quite so focused on one thing.
Gotcha. Well, if you don't mind, share a little bit about your family and your children. I know, like I said, Jeff's been on my podcast, and you guys have a unique situation there. So you mind sharing with our listeners what that is?
Well, we were a little older when we got married. I was 31, and when we got married, we were living in California then. And my wife and I said, well, wouldn't it be fun to have a multicultural family? And then we got busy and doing things and forgot about that. And we had 4 kids and had moved back to Idaho so the kids could know their grandparents.
Yeah. And
our youngest was 6. And Susan, my wife, came home one day and said, you know, remember when we talked about having a multicultural family? I said, yeah. She says, well, there's a family in the ward who has people from all over. And now I think we kind of know how to do it. Are you still up for it? I said, sure, let's go. So we started the process. Wow. And so I was well into my 40s then.
Okay.
And you have to go through quite a process for adoption. They check all your finances and legal and all that.
Yeah, right.
And we learned pretty quickly that we were unlikely to get any babies because we already had 4 kids because we were older.
Right.
And then one day, the person helping us said, would you consider hardship cases? I said, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
She says, well, we have all kinds of black children right now who we have no place to put them. I said, we'd be just as happy. We'd prefer that, actually.
Wow.
He says, well, okay, let's start that. So another couple of months goes by. They're doing all this paperwork. And my wife and I said, there aren't a lot of black people who live here. Maybe we ought to just get 2 while we're at it. So we brought that up with our counselor, and she says, no, you can't do that. So I said, well, we appealed that then to the agency, and they said, no, you can't do that. You have to wait a year after your first one and then start the whole process all over again.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I don't know whether it was arrogance or faith, but we went out and bought a double stroller and 2 cribs. And sure enough, everything got done, and we got a call from an agency in Atlanta that said, we got a little boy here for you. I said, we'll take him.
Yeah.
And you have to wait about 3 weeks to do all the legal. But the very next day, we got a call from an agency in Washington, D.C. said, we got a little boy here for you. I said, okay, let me explain the problem.
Yeah, right.
And we would really like to do this, but we've got to get now 3 agencies to agree. And it seemed like 1,000 phone calls later, but finally everybody actually agreed. These boys were born the same day, about 3 hours apart.
Wow.
And so my wife got on a plane and went to Washington, D.C. to pick up the first one and back. And the next week I went to Atlanta to pick up the second one and back. Wow. And so we had 2 new babies.
That's amazing.
And they have been, they're just polar opposites, used to fight all the time, and they still live together.
Yeah.
So, we've had the experience of having a multicultural family, and what a great experience it's been.
Yeah, I bet. Thanks for sharing that. I know there's been probably a lot of lessons, but can you maybe share with us what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned having that type of a situation with your family?
Well, there still is a lot more prejudice and discrimination than I thought there was. And, we've spent a lot of time. We spent about 8 years, one of my sons, living in Africa. So they've had experiences all over the world. But when they went up, actually, much later, I was talking to a grandson and telling him some stories and telling him about his 2 uncles who, when they were small, were periodically followed home by the police because of their skin color. And he looked at me and said, Grandpa, that's stupid. Why would that happen? Well, think of how do you explain prejudice and discrimination to a 7-year-old?
Right.
But he wanted to know.
Yeah.
And so we talked about it, and he didn't want to let it go. And the next morning he brought up at breakfast with his family, and we talked about it more. And I then began to realize that using stories, we can get into serious discussions with people, including grandkids, but also neighbors and friends, without fighting, without it being a lecture, just having it be part of the conversation.
Okay. Wow. I love that. And how did that, is that kind of what brought you to, we've got your book here, Stories That Shape Us. And I know you're really into storytelling and the importance of it. Is that kind of where it started, where you started seeing how important this is?
It really did. Like many older people, I'm 77, you're encouraged to write a family history, which I wrote my own history.
Right.
Boring as all get out, like most of them. And I said, but there are things that I've learned that I would like to pass on, or there are things that I feel that I would like to discuss with somebody, but nobody wanted to do it. And so I started thinking about it, and I first had to think through what are the values and traits and beliefs that are important to me.
Yeah.
And that I would like to pass on. And then I started identifying stories that I could use to do that, stories from my life. And I would try that out. I used to always read books and things to the grandkids. One day we didn't have any books, and my wife said, well, just tell them stories from when you were little. I said, well, why would they be interested in that?
Right.
So I did. That's all they wanted from then on. No, tell us about you, Grandpa.
Yeah.
And what I learned was using stories, we can do things that we otherwise couldn't do. And when we tell those stories, as a relative in particular, we're passing on not just data, because kids are overwhelmed with data these days.
Yeah, right.
What they don't have is perspective and the humanity and the parts of that give it, they can relate to. And I think kids today just desperately want to relate to something.
Right.
And if they can hear a story from their grandfather or their grandmother and say, they may be in a position where they say, you know, my grandpa did that, or my grandma did this, or she had this. That's kind of like what I'm dealing with. Maybe I could do that too.
Yeah.
And there's too little of that going on. We're too busy, too caught up in the internet.
Yes.
And I think in that process, we lose a lot of humanity, that transferring the humanness that gives people the ability to make sense of what they're hearing.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's kind of getting lost. Like you said, we're so occupied with our phones and computers and especially the younger generation, because they don't know any different. You and I didn't have that growing up. Yeah. We didn't have phones. We didn't have the internet. And, and I think we long for I know I do. I'm like, man, it was so much simpler back then. It felt like.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
What do you think?
It was. Well, every generation has its own challenges. Yeah. I hear people talk about how awful life is today. I say, my grandparents went through the Great Depression and World War II. That was pretty awful.
Yeah.
My own generation had enormous change in Vietnam and all kinds of the civil rights movement. And so I'll hear people sometimes now saying, oh, look, they had this Black Lives Matter march. The world's falling apart. And I'm thinking, you don't remember the 60s when we were burning down cities and taking over universities. No, I don't.
Yeah.
But we forget is the United States and probably every other country, we have always been a contentious society.
Right.
And I think why people see something today and they get all upset about it is they don't put it in any perspective, because they've never talked to anybody about the past, or they've never related it to other people's experiences.
Right. Wow. Well, let's talk about, this book that you've written, which congratulations, by the way. It's not an easy thing to do, right? No. But, the book is titled Stories That Shape Us, and the subtitle is A Guide to Passing on Wisdom, Love, and Joy to the Next Generation. Tell us, first of all, a little bit more about the book and then why you ultimately wrote the book.
Well, like I had mentioned, we have lived all over the world and done things, and a number of things led to writing the book. One was when my two youngest sons, Jeffrey and Hunter, when they were about, 6, we were moving from Idaho to Harare, Zimbabwe. And they were packing things, and they came across some pictures of me with President Ford and President Reagan, and they said, well, what's this, Grandpa? This Photoshop? And I realized I had never talked to them about the time that I had spent working at the White House. They had no idea. Wow. And I said, boy, there's a lot about my life they don't know. And so I thought, I've got to find some way to kind of share some of the things that have happened. Then later on, Elder Ballard asked me to write a book. And so I started thinking about it a little bit. And then when I started telling stories to grandkids, I thought, maybe there's a way to do this. So I started just writing down some stories. And then I started writing down, here are the values and the traits that from my life are important to me.
Right.
And how could I illustrate those with stories? And I would try these out on some of the grandkids. They were my test.
Yeah, they were the
test group.
Yeah.
And partway through, I said, I think there's a lot of people who have learned a lot in their lives and would like to pass that on, particularly to children and grandchildren, but they're not sure how.
Yeah.
Because we talk today about TV or movies or internet, and we don't talk about subjects or topics that are really critical. And so I said, maybe I could turn this into a workbook, a how-to.
Yeah.
So I took each one of these areas and started saying, look, here's how you could do that. Here's how you could identify your principles. Here's how you could identify the stories.
Right.
Here's how you could go about telling your own stories. And that would make a difference to your great-great-grandchildren who you never know.
Right. I love that, because I think a lot of people probably tuning in right now are like, yeah, how do I do that? How do I start, a conversation with my kids when it's always been around, like you said, what's on the internet, what's on TV, sports, and, all that stuff, which is, again, not a bad thing, but you're right. There's a lot of depth and perspective that's just staying in us that we're not sharing.
It's like, excuse me, I've got to check and see what's on Thursday Night Football.
Exactly.
But we don't talk about the things that we have learned are important and that we would like to pass on.
Right. No, I love that. And so the book is more like a guide on how to help you, open up to your family, your children or grandchildren based on where you're at in life.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's even a bonus section you have to download that I put together that's how to talk with family and friends about difficult subjects. And, we don't do that today.
We don't.
I belong to a little empty nesters group. We're all kind of in our 70s and 80s, and a pretty distinguished group when you get to know them. They're nuclear physicists and microbiologists. They've lived all over the world.
Man.
And so a couple of years ago, it was election time, and I said, why don't we take one of the topics for this election and discuss it? No way.
Yeah.
Can't do that. We might offend somebody.
Right.
I'm thinking, isn't that sad? These are the people I would really like to learn from.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out how to do that because we're so afraid of offending or, and I think we all have somebody in our family. Well, we can't have Uncle George because, we can't talk to him. He's the right or the left, and no discussion about that.
Yeah.
And isn't that a shame?
It is.
Because that's how we learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead we depend on the internet, which forces us further to the right or the left when we really want to be in the middle, but we don't know how to do that.
We don't know how to do it. Wow. So have you been able to navigate that yet with them? Or is there something you're still trying to work on? Or
I've got them all a copy of the book.
Good.
And I asked them to download this particular session.
Yeah.
And so I've got to bring it up again and say, look, could I just try this one more time?
Yeah.
What if we took this subject and the ground rules, and I write these ground rules in the book, first ground rule was we are not trying to convert.
Right.
No trying to convert, we're just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Second ground rule is no bombarding everybody with data. We want to listen. And let's have this discussion not to convert, not to change minds, but to try to mine each other and understand. Why do you view it that way? What's been your experience? What's happened to you? What did you hear? And well, here's what I heard. Here's how I can. Well, why do you see it that way?
Yeah.
I think we could have a great discussion. I could learn from people who have incredible experience.
Right.
And right now I haven't been able to find out how to do that.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And, when you say this, I'm thinking, man, the world needs this so bad right now because, again, there's such a divide, and no matter what side you fall on, you can't argue with what you just said, Steve, that, I think we're a lot closer than we think, but we don't have the conversations to figure that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that's really what you're saying is like, let's talk with each other. Let's listen to each other. And let me understand, I may not agree with where your approach is or your beliefs, but tell me why you're there. And then once I heard this once, do you ever watch Ted Lasso by chance?
Yeah.
But in one of his episodes, he says, he quotes Walt Whitman, and he said, be curious and not judgmental. And then he, basically, so if we're curious, we're going to ask people questions. If I'm curious about you, Steve, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. But if I'm judgmental and I don't agree with that, I'm just going to put up a wall. I'm not going to ask you anything. So I don't get to know you. But if I ask you questions and get to know you, it's impossible for me not to like you.
That's
right?
True. And it's true with people from every country, every culture, every color, every religion.
Yeah.
One of the tragedies for me, because I'd been working in Africa, and in fact, I had been a mission president in Durban, which is about 30% Muslim. And 9/11 happened, and I started hearing all these, all Muslims are terrible. I hate Muslims. I'm thinking, no, you don't. You don't know Muslims. All you know is this.
Yeah.
And so I would share experience. I took some of my missionaries once up to a weekend to do some hiking in the Drakensberg Mountains. They're kind of between South Africa and Lesotho. And when we finished, we came back because I wanted to show them this just beautiful little mosque in this little town. Spectacular little mosque. And so we're there, we're all kind of dirty, and we're looking at it across a little stream. There's a bridge to get over the mosque, and there's a knock on my window. And so I open the window, and this guy says, "Would you like to come in?" I said, "We'd love to, but, we're kind of all dirty and sweaty." And he said, "That's okay, but I need to ask you when you get in to take off your shoes and wash your hands." Great.
Yeah.
So we all go in, and he says, "Would you just sit here for a minute and while we finish our prayers or stand here?" So we stand in the back.
Yeah.
They finish their prayers. And when their prayers are finished, they all come back and greet us and shake us in our hands and say, Jesus was one of our great prophets, and we are one of the Abrahamic religions. Let's talk about what we have together.
Wow.
I thought, would we be as welcoming as they are?
Yeah.
And that's who Muslims are to me.
Yeah.
And so it was great sadness when I saw this, just all of a sudden hate of Muslims all over the world.
Yeah.
But that's true whether it's color.
Yeah.
We are 98% the same. Right. We have the same values, the same beliefs, the same hopes, the same fears. And somehow we find some way to put others down, whether it's to make ourselves feel better, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we lose so much in the process. We lose so much of life that could be enriched by cutting ourselves out from anybody who's different.
Wow. Well, I love your perspective, and I can see it. You got emotional as you were talking about that. And I know it means a lot to you that you obviously have this passion and drive to make sure that we can all connect, and that you see people as just people. Where did that come from? Were you taught that as a young kid? Did you learn that from your own parents? Or is that something just naturally your heart tells you this is the right thing?
I think I learned some from my parents. I was just always that way. I had a interesting experience. This little area where I grew up, there were quite a few Japanese there, and the Japanese farmers were the best farmers in the area, and the kids in my high school was who I wanted to be like. And years later, I was in college till I figured out that they were brought in World War II from the detainment camps.
Yeah.
And it was years later I was in some race relation courses in the military, and so you fill out all these forms and take these surveys, and I sit down with the counselor. He says, "Where did you get your beliefs about Asians?" I said, "What do you mean?"
Yeah.
He says, "Well, you don't seem to have the typical biases about Asians." I said, "I don't even know what they would be." Because the kids I grew up with, that's who I wanted to be like. And, maybe it started there.
Yeah.
Maybe it started because that was an area of the civil rights marches, and I would watch that on a little black and white TV and go, how can this be happening?
Yeah.
And it just caught me.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
so that one of the things that I hope has guided my life is a real dislike of prejudice, of putting people down, of being mean because you can, and what we all lose because of that.
Right. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great perspective, right? See, I'm learning from you because you're telling me a story, right? Well, I think what you're doing is fantastic, and I think it's something we all should do. You know, me being a parent and a grandparent is making sure, you know, I share my legacy, what I've been through, and because I think it's important to give them perspective. I think I've actually done a pretty good job. You'd be proud of me, Steve. I think I've been pretty good with my kids. They would tell you, oh, yeah, my dad tells stories about his past all the time. And
great. Well, write those down.
Yeah, there are.
So your great-grandchildren, who you may never know,
that's a
can
good
have
point.
the benefit of that.
No, I agree. I've written a book, so it is written down.
Makes a difference.
Not all of them, but there's more. But I do need to do that more often. You know, if you could pick a story, and I know this is going to be a tough one, but if you could share a story with us even right now of your childhood, or what's one of your favorite ones you share with your grandkids? Is there one that stands out, or is it too hard to pick because there's so many?
Well, it is hard to pick because, you know, in the book I tried to put in stories that were funny, some were not so funny, some were, and one of the stories they like is, as in graduate school, actually, there's two stories together, but I had a great professor, and one of the things he had us do was write a book about, not a book, but a paper about ourselves. We had to take intelligence tests and sociological tests and interview people and write our biggest fears and dreams. And one of the things I put in there was I'd like to climb Everest. Well, that caught his attention. We were doing a one-on-one interview, and he says, well, climb Everest, you must do a lot of climbing. I said, no, never climbed anything. He says, well, you must do a lot of outdoor stuff. I said, no, I don't do that. And he looked at me and he says, you know, most people who climb Everest go outside. And that really grabbed me. So I took the summer off and worked at Jackson Hole as a waiter and learned how to climb.
Wow.
And run rivers and things. And so I tell the kids this one story about when we were first moving to Jackson. I had a friend up there, and he would used to tell us, oh, you got to we'll run the lunch counter. What's the lunch counter? Well, it's just little rapids in the river, and you'll love it. We'll go down there and we'll do it, 8-10 times, and we'll come back up and go it again. And what he didn't tell us is this was early in the season. The rafting companies weren't running trips yet because it was too rough, too much water, too high.
Man. Yeah.
And that when it's that cold, if the water weren't moving, it'd be ice.
Man.
But we all go down there, about 45 minutes down, go down the embankment to the lunch counter. And like a bunch of lemmings, we put on our life jackets and just follow John off this cliff into the water. And the first thing we learned was you can breathe in, but you can't breathe out. So you get in that water, you go, and then you don't ride the rapids. It takes you down. The river tries to kill you.
Man.
And
that is scary.
So we get through. I get through. I don't see anybody else. There are about 6 of us. And so I finally get back across the river, climb up the embankment. I'm sure at least somebody's dead out of this.
Yeah.
But I get back to the old Volkswagen van, and everybody's there. Nobody says a word. Not a word. We all climb back in the van. So much for 8 or 10 times. Climbed back in the van, rode back to Jackson. Not a word. It was months till we were even could go down, even look at it.
Yeah, I bet.
Because we were so terrified. And what I remember is lying on my back in that van, enjoying every bump and rattle because I was alive.
Yes.
And I could feel that. Well, I would tell this story to my grandkids, and they go, I said, what do you think about that? You were pretty dumb, weren't you, Grandpa? Yeah, I was pretty dumb.
Right.
Have you ever done anything like that? Well, kind of. I haven't told my mom this, but I
Right.
did this.
Yeah.
And we get in a discussion.
No, that's beautiful.
And I said, here's how I felt in the back of the van. How did you feel? Oh, yeah. And now you're in this philosophical discussion.
Yeah, now you're engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's been one of my favorite stories
I love
with the
that.
grandkids.
I love that. It's funny because I've gone down lunch counter. Is that how you say it?
The
The rapids.
yeah.
I've gone
the
down
lunch
there.
counter.
Lunch counter. Excuse me.
Because you lose your lunch there.
Yes, you do. And I'll never forget. We took our young men down there, down the Snake River, and coming up to the lunch counter, and we had a kid's, really one of our toughest young men. He's muscly, and he's at the very tip of the boat, right,
Yeah.
of the raft. And we hit that thing, and I'm in the very back, and I'm holding on for dear life. It launches this kid. I mean, he flies over the top of me, like literally right over the top, and I'm thinking, well, he's a goner,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm still just going. And we get through it, and it wasn't really compared to what you went through, not even close. But man, I was like, once good for me, I'm good. I don't need to do that again. Yeah, grateful I made it through it.
Well, and I ask the grandkids when they tell this story, well, what do you learn from that story? Well, Grandpa's pretty dumb, but life is pretty important, isn't it? It was pretty important to you then.
Yeah.
Yeah. How was it for you? And then you're in a discussion.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You mentioned about when we listen to someone, when we start to understand them, we start to understand and see what they really value. I want to ask you the question, what are your values? I think I've gained a few of those as we're talking, but I'd like you to share with our listeners, what if you were to give us a list even, like what are your values and why maybe?
Well, there is kind of a list. In the book I identified, I think it's 10 traits and 4 principles and 3 beliefs.
Okay.
And I don't claim that those are the only ones or the most important, but they're ones that have been important to me.
Right.
And, one of those is just looking on the bright side. I see so many people who are so caught up with something they have done in the past, a mistake they made, a crime they committed, something they had done, and they can't let it go. And they're never able to let that go. And so it's hard to move on. And so I tell these stories of looking at the bright side, because if you can do that, you can move on.
Yeah.
So I tell all kinds of stories in that, but looking on the bright side is one of those, and I value that.
Yeah.
It's been one of the things that when friends talk about me, and I'll hear them, they'll say, I love being with you, Steve, because you're always so optimistic.
Yeah.
I always feel better
because
you're so optimistic.
No, I love that.
And I think that's an important trait.
I do. Well, and you can tell that means a lot to you. And I think that's why you're comfortable having hard conversations, because you're like, let's just both come together and look on the bright side, even though we may disagree.
Yeah.
Right? That's beautiful. Wow. Well, I really do admire the way you carry yourself and live your life. Like I said, Jeff couldn't say enough good about you. He looks, obviously, you're his father, and he looks to you in that way, and he loves you, and I know you know that. And like I said, he was so adamant to say, you got to have my dad on the show because of the values you taught him, because he talked a lot about that when I met with him.
He probably didn't tell you about some of the time growing up when my only hope was to get him through high school without him ending up in prison. He could have been, he was a trial sometimes.
Sure.
But look what an incredible kid he's turned out to be.
Wow, he's amazing. You're right.
I admire him. He's my manager in trying to get this book out.
Yeah.
And we have fun doing things together.
That's amazing.
And, but if I had focused just on a mistake that I had made with him, and we all make all kinds of mistakes raising kids.
Right.
Or if he had focused only on times when he is mad at me, we would have had a disastrous relationship.
Yep.
But we were both able to look beyond that and see each other as human beings, not just a son and a dad, but seeing each other as human beings and learn from each other, and that we've changed as we grew and had more experiences. Now we have this incredible life together.
Yeah.
And I think that's true not just with a father and a son, but it's true in families. It's true in society.
It is.
We've got to look beyond.
We do. We absolutely do. And I think that's why this needs to get out there, because I know for me, I need to be better. I need to be coached better. I need to have better ideas when I'm sitting there with my family, instead of just focusing on the TV or, other things that maybe we saw on the internet, which is not, again, necessarily a bad thing, but I like the in-depth stories and the perspectives, and to be able to have people really talk about what's really going on, right?
One of my daughters has gotten a big place up in Camas for the Christmas week. And everybody's coming, the whole family, all the grandkids, everybody. And not everybody will be there all the time, but one of the things I'm doing is at nighttime, we're going to have story time with anybody who wants to come.
Yeah, cool.
And I'll just start with a story from the book and say, now, tell me your stories. What do you learn from that? Because it's a chance to pass on some things, but it's also fun.
Yeah.
We learn more about each other by talking about it and telling each other stories.
Yeah. That's going to be a great time, right?
It will be.
I bet you're looking forward to that. That's awesome. I want to ask you a question. If there's someone listening to you right now, Steve, and they're in a dark place and they're not sure how to get out of that, what would you tell that one person who's listening to you right now?
I'd probably start by asking them some questions. Was there a time in your life when you felt happy? When you didn't feel this darkness? When you felt some joy? And then they would everybody can come up with a couple of times. Mm-hmm. I'd say, well, what were things like then? And what I mean by that is, were you by yourself? Were you with other people? Were you working on something? Were you teaching? Were you learning? What was the environment?
Yeah.
What got you to that? What made that fun? And then I try to help them explore, how could you create some of that? How could you recreate a little bit of that? What needs to happen? Mm. Is it forgiveness? Is it finding somebody new? Is it finding purpose? Is it changing something you or who you're with? And try to help them talk through how they could get back to those light spots.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. I love that. That's a good perspective as well. I appreciate that. If someone, Steve, wants to get a copy of your book, Stories That Shape Us, or they want to ask you a question or get to know more about what you do and maybe get a story from you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can find the book on Amazon.
Okay.
And that's the easiest place. Or we have a website. It's just Steve, STEVE -MANN.com. And Jeff posts different things on there and some stories on there. They can actually out there download this, how to talk to friends and neighbors from that. And so any of those would tell you what's going on. I just came from a meeting where I think we're going to start some YouTube channel to tell some of these stories and to talk about some of these traits. And the people I was working with are really recommending I do that, and it sounds kind of fun. So that'll hopefully show up in the future.
Steve on YouTube, man. That's awesome.
I don't even know how to get on it myself, but the world has changed so much.
Right.
My growing up was a telephone that you have to wait till Mrs. Goetz quits talking, and because it was a party line, and then you can talk for a while.
That's awesome.
And my first TV, I was probably 8 when we got it, a little black and white box, 2 channels, and they all shut off at 12 with the national anthem. And so this whole world we live in now is a very, very different one.
So different.
But in spite of that, the humanity that I grew up with on that farm, the emotions, the experiences apply just as well to today's world.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we think it can't.
Yeah.
Well, they're not interested. They are interested.
Yeah.
And because the issues the youth today are dealing with aren't data-driven. They're emotion-driven. They're humanity-driven. And even though they live in a different world than I grew up in, that same humanity and emotion and feeling is there. Yeah. And they can learn from my experiences, and I can learn from theirs.
Wow. Man, that's a mic drop right there, Steve. I love it. I love it. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're out of town up here with me. Thank you so much. It means the world to me. Thanks for sharing your book here with us today and your stories and your values. It means a lot. It really does. And I really do respect what you do. And I'm grateful that I had met your son previous to this. And I think the world of him as well. And he knows that. But thank you for just being who you are and making this world a better place.
You're so welcome. It's just been a joy to be here on your podcast and talk to you and get to know you a little bit.
Thank you.
And I hope our paths can cross more often.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put the link to your book and also your website in the show notes so people can get right to it. And,
thank you.
And I encourage everyone listening right now to make sure you go and get a copy of this book. And if you're a parent or a grandparent, this would be a great guide for you to get the conversations going with your grandkids and your own children. And so Steve's the example of that. So thanks, Steve, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Thanks to my sponsors. I couldn't do this without you. I really appreciate all that you do for me, and always blessed to be able to sit with someone like you, Steve. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great time, everyone. Till next time.